The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, believes in miracles, so he at least saw last night's extraordinary election result coming. Welcome to Insiders. Scott Morrison was the one-man band who stole the show. He and the coalition will govern at least in minority, and they may yet achieve a majority. After losing more than 50 consecutive opinion polls, and maybe that's the last time we should mention them, but after 3 years of losses, the coalition won the only one that counts. And the newspapers overnight are almost universally declaring Scott Morrison the miracle man. This is how it looked when counting ended last night. First, the makeup of the chamber. The Liberal National Party will have a minimum 74 seats. 76 is the majority number. Labor will have a minimum 66, and the Greens and the Independents have 6. Now, that represented a two-party preferred vote of 51.9 to the coalition and 48.1 to the Labor Party. So, rounding that out, that's 52% to the coalition, when no opinion poll gave them any better than 49%. Now, the primary vote. The Coalition, 42, Labor, 34, the Greens, 11, Clive Palmer and One Nation around 3%. Now, the real showstopper was Queensland, where the Coalition got a swing in its favour of 4.7%. Nobody saw that coming, and neither did anybody predict 10-plus swings to the Coalition in Dawson, George Christensen's seat, and the same in Capricornia, and 8% in Flynn, a seat that Labor expected to win. In New South Wales, no net gains for Labor, though they did pick up a seat, Gilmore, perhaps the only seat in the country that they actually gained, given that Corangamite and Dunkley were notionally Labor. Nothing in the West either, and 6% swings to the coalition in Bass and Braddon in Tasmania completes the picture. This is how the leaders reacted to those phenomenal results.
These are the quiet Australians who have won a great victory tonight. Thank you. Because it's always been about them. It's always been for those of you watching this at home tonight. For me and for my government, for all of my team, it's all about you. Tonight is not about me, or it's not about even the Liberal Party. Tonight is about every single Australian who depends on their government to put them first. And so, friends, that is exactly what we are going to do. Our government will come together after this night and we will get back to work.
To offer yourself as a leader of such a great country, to seek to serve such generous and courageous people, it is an extraordinary honour. I leave the stage tonight, but I encourage all Australians, particularly young Australians, never lose faith in the power of individuals to make a difference. Never give up. Never give up aiming for better. Better be a country, better be a future. Because the things that matter most are the things that are worth fighting for.
So Bill Shorten has quit as party leader, opening up a ballot that could well include Tanya Plibersek, Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen. Tanya Plibersek, the party's deputy, will be one of our guests this morning, as will the Liberals' deputy leader, the man who took the economic challenge up to the Labor Party, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. And also this morning, Hugh Parkinson's take on the campaign.
We live in the best country in the world, but to secure your future, the road ahead depends on a strong economy.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
And Sammy J joins Mike Bowers for Talking Pictures.
I've come down to the Blue Ties change room to talk to the government coach about the grand final that's just been played.
Mate, this is the sweetest victory of all.
So, time to bring in the panel now. Niki Savva, David Crowe and Patricia Karvelas. And, well, it seems everybody accepts it was a miracle, which means nobody saw it coming, David. And they didn't, because let me just give you one example with the nearest, I think, poll to the result was Ipsos, who had the coalition vote at 49, it was 52.
And, you know, there was some weakness in the Labor vote in the Ipsos polling. But it was very hard to get a real sense of that, and there were a lot of questions about whether that was a reliable indicator. There was a lot of second guessing about the polling all the way leading up to this election, but the result is so different to the polls. It's really it'll lead to some soul searching on that, I think.
Yeah, how did they not see what was happening in Queensland? I think the Ipsos poll was 50-50, and it was something like 58-42.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
Way outside the margin of error.
Well, the problem was that the published polls were certainly very different from the internal polling that the Liberal Party was doing. The Liberal Party polling was actually picking up big shifts in Queensland. There's no doubt about that.
They were not picking up a victory.
They were picking up swings, excuse me, into Longman. So they put more resources into there so that they could pick up the seat. They assured me days out that Dawson was looking fine. They could see what was happening. It just wasn't being reflected in the public polls. So I think that's where the problem
I don't think
lies.
they could believe it themselves.
The Labor Party polling, the internal polling, showed them behind in all the key seats in Queensland. Labor strategists in Queensland were very, very worried about their polling. They didn't see quite this, right? The loss of those seats, but gaining seats, they didn't have any confidence that they were going to do that. And in fact, they were worried. And if you spoke to Liberal MPs fighting in some of those seats, they said there are baseball bats here for Bill Shorten. It is toxic in Queensland.
It's true that the coalition had some indications that they were doing better in Queensland than the published poll showed. But I think it is also revealing that if you look at their actions, not just their words, at no point did Scott Morrison go to Longman during the campaign, and that was the surprise upside for them. So their actions didn't show that they saw that one within sight very early in the campaign at all.
We'll unpick all of the potential reasons for why all of this happened when we get to the panel discussion a little later on. But disunity is death, they say. I'm thinking disunity, way to go. When you look back, Julia Gillard knocked over Kevin Rudd and won an election. Malcolm Turnbull knocked over Tony Abbott and won an election. And now Scott Morrison.
Disunity is death, but it's not, right? Now, OK, 3 Prime Ministers, which is incredible in such a short amount of time that the Liberals have had. What Scott Morrison did, though, Barrie, which I think is extraordinary and why he's going to be a legend in the Liberal Party for so long, is he managed to neutralise the question around the revolving Prime Minister. And he did that through the formulation of the Canberra bubble. It was frustrating for journalists, but it was genius. It was genius.
Wasn't much fun for those inside the bubble, you mean?
Well, not only that, he virtually erased the past for the Liberal Party and barely mentioned the Liberal Party because his sole intention every single day, and it was extraordinary discipline on his part, was to keep the focus on Shorten and what Shorten was proposing. And the Labor Party went in with lead in both saddlebags. They had Shorten on one side and $400 billion worth of extra taxes on the other, and that's what Morrison...
That's the sort of thing we want to examine a little later on, but just one very quick question before we go to the interviews. What's the prospect of majority government, Niki?
Very real at the moment. The Liberals have not conceded the loss of really any seats in Victoria. They're still hoping that they can pick up Corangamite. Maybe Dunkley is gone.
And Chisholm.
They could hold on to Chisholm.
Yep.
So the only gain, I think, as you said earlier on, is Gilmore. So this is the worst result for Labor in generations.
In terms of expectations, yes.
Just a quick fact check, the PM did go on Thursday to Longman.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to be clear about that.
All right, well, so much for the panel discuss as we go through this special 90-minute program this morning. Keep that in mind. But it's time now for our guests. In a moment, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. But first, Labor's Deputy Leader, Tanya Plibersek. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
OK, in the light of day now, are you any closer to sort of figuring out what went wrong?
Look, I think before we get to that, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. The first is, obviously, I congratulate the Prime Minister and wish him the very best for the sake of the nation. I hope he's able to come to terms with some of the big problems that face us as a nation, like finally getting a solution on climate change and energy. I also want to thank Bill Shorten and his family, his staff, and the millions of Labor Party supporters and voters who worked so hard for a Labor win. As to what went wrong, look, I think there's two main features. The first is obviously we faced a very cashed up scare campaign from the United Australia Party. $80 million is the estimate of how much Clive Palmer spent, not to, it seems, win himself a spot, but to trash Labor. And secondly, our policy agenda, it was big, it was bold, but I think perhaps we didn't have enough time to explain all of the benefits of it to the people who would benefit. I think genuinely, if every pensioner and seniors healthcare card holder knew about pensioner dental, they would have voted for it. I think if every family who was going to benefit from free or cheaper childcare knew about it, they would have voted for it. I think if every working person who thought they were going to get their penalty rates restored or get a pay rise under Labor knew about that, they would have voted for it. But when you've got such a large agenda, it's sometimes hard to explain all of the details to all of the people who benefit.
OK, so too big and too bold?
No, I don't think so. I think we had the option of having a whole campaign based on the chaos and disunity of the last 6 years, the three Prime Ministers, the three Treasurers, the fact that they still all hate each other. They can't be in the same room at the Liberal Party launch. We could have just focused on that, but I think that's letting Australia down. We have a really ambitious policy agenda that deals with the big questions like climate change, like the fact that wages have flatlined in recent years, the 1.8 million people who are unemployed or underemployed. I think it's important to address those big issues.
Well, you say that Clive Palmer should take some of the blame, but did you make it too easy for him? You look at what happened around Dawson, Capricornia, Flynn, 8, 9, 10% swings, and that has to come back to the Adani mine.
Look, a couple of things. I think it's really important to acknowledge the concerns of North and Central Queensland when it comes to jobs. And we did have a very strong infrastructure program in Northern Queensland, in Central Queensland, that would have delivered more jobs sooner than anything that the Adani mine was proposing. And those jobs would have been in construction. They would have also supported agriculture and tourism and other industries in the north and in central Queensland. I think the telling thing, though, the Palmer campaign against Labor, and also essentially the Liberals campaign as well, the scare campaign against our policies, wasn't actually about our policies. It was about a whole lot of made-up stuff that they said was Labor policy, like death duties. Even as late as yesterday, I had someone stop me on a polling booth to ask me what this death duties plan was that Labor had. So that misinformation that spread so easily on the internet and through the Palmer ads, I think did hurt us a great deal. Those preferences, the UAP preferences and One Nation preferences, have made a big impact, particularly in Queensland.
Will you be a candidate for the leadership?
Well, I'm certainly considering it. I mean, my determination is to ensure that we're in the best place to win in 3 years' time, that we continue the discipline and the unity that we've shown in the last 6 years, and that we continue to offer Australians real options. I think the investment in health and education, in infrastructure, a real plan to tackle climate change, a real plan to lift wages, these are all absolutely critical to our chances of winning next time, and making sure that we're explaining those policies is critical too.
So it sounds like you're very close to deciding to run.
Look, I'll talk to my colleagues today, but of course I'm considering it.
Yeah, and of course now, given the new rules, you have to also win the support of not only the party room, but party members. How do you think you'd go in that respect?
Oh, look, I have loved campaigning. In this election campaign, I have loved campaigning with our loyal and dedicated party members who have consistently said to me that they are so happy that Labor has been united and disciplined under Bill's leadership with the team that you've seen. And they've been proud of our agenda. I mean, this country has really significant issues like tackling climate change with an energy policy that brings down pollution and brings down power prices and sees more investment in renewables. How is this government going to manage that when they are still so broken inside with climate change deniers on one side and people who at least accept the science on the other side, but 14 different energy policies?
Right.
We have an obligation as Labor Party people to keep fighting for a fairer Australia, for a strong economy and a fair society. We'll keep doing that.
Sounds like a campaign pitch for a different contest now. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
OK, next up live here in the studio, the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. And while he joins us, here's more from the Prime Minister.
Every single day, they who will have right in front of us as we put in place and continue the policies which we know will keep our economy strong, to guarantee the essentials that Australians rely on, that'll keep Australians safe and secure, and most importantly, that will keep Australians together. We are an amazing country of amazing people. God bless Australia.
Josh Frydenberg, good morning and welcome.
Nice to be with you, Barrie.
And congratulations. That's one for the history books.
It certainly was, and a lot of credit goes obviously to the Prime Minister who led from the front.
Though your part in this goes back, I think, before the budget to January, when you were you were everywhere on the economy when I think everybody else was on the beach.
Oh, look, it was a team effort, and I want to pay credit to Matthias Cormann as well as Finance Minister, who's been there through 6 years. But really, the Prime Minister led from the front. I mean, from the minute the starter's gun was fired in this campaign, we knew we were behind, but we also knew we were in it. And no one knew this better than the Prime Minister, and he crisscrossed the country with great energy, belief and conviction. He was assured, he was confident, he was across the detail, and he sold our economic plan to the Australian people, a plan that resonated with them, and he made the obvious point that this election was not a coronation of Bill Shorten. It was actually a real contest.
You said he had belief. Well, he believes in miracles.
He does. In fact, Barrie, I got a text message from him on Friday night saying exactly that, and it's turned out to be the case. Oh, well, he said he believed in miracles, that he wouldn't stop till he fell over.
That was before the event.
That was on Friday. Yeah, he said he would campaign to the end. He was in and out of Tasmania. He was confident. But what Scott Morrison did so effectively is he spoke to what he has called the quiet Australian. The silent majority. And he spoke and appealed to the aspirations of every Australian, people who want to own their own home, people who want to run a business, people who want to raise a family, people who want to save for their retirement. That was Scott Morrison's message. That was the Liberal and National Party's message.
And maybe when you told people that Labor was introducing a retirees tax, they believed you.
Well, it was true.
No, it's not.
It was a $57 billion.
Explain to me what a retiree tax is.
A retirees tax was a change to the franking credit system.
It's not a tax.
It was a tax because these people had based their retirement on receiving a cash refund in the event that their marginal tax rate was below 30%.
So Labor was proposing to take away a concession. Where's the tax?
The tax was on all those 1 million plus retirees, Barrie, who had done nothing wrong.
Taking away a concession and then you call it a retirees tax. As I understand it, the biggest swing in this came and the biggest demographic that moved was the over 65s. I think you persuaded a lot of people over 65 that there really was a retirees tax.
Well, there was a retirees tax, there was a housing tax, there was a superannuation tax,
there
was higher income tax.
You don't see the difference between taking away a benefit and imposing a tax?
Well, the reality is that over 1 million Australians had based their retirement on bipartisan approach to franking credits. It was an accepted principle of our tax system. That doesn't make it a tax.
You see, the point I'm making here is if you call something like that, you take away a concession and that then becomes a tax, it just makes it harder, doesn't it, for governments into the future to do serious tax reform when it's distorted in that way.
Well, Barrie, this was very bad policy because the people who were affected, majority of whom were women, were people who had based their retirement on an existing system, a system that had served Australia very well, a system that the Labor Party had supported. And of the people who were going to be hit by the retirees tax, over 80% of them had a taxable income under $37,000. But the choice was very clear around the tax plans. We were lowering taxes while guaranteeing essential services, infrastructure spending at record levels, creating new apprentices, paying back Labor's debt. And Bill Shorten and Labor were promising $387 billion of high tax.
All right, now on climate change, and I'm sure you've got a message in your electorate, being a Victorian electorate. Julie Bishop has said that that she thinks the party ought to revisit the issue, and particularly revisit the NEG, the National Energy Guarantee, which she thought was the closest thing you'd come to bipartisanship, and I'm sure you believe that at one point. What do you think ought to be done?
Well, we've spelt out our climate solutions package before the election, $3.5 billion for a range of important measures, namely Snowy 2.0 to create the big battery on the east coast of Australia, energy efficiency programs, grants to community organisations for solar panels, a land-based system, a scheme based on the emissions reduction fund.
All of that, but don't you get lessons from election campaigns? And when Julie Bishop suggests you revisit the NEG, you don't consider that?
Well, our plan is very clear, and it's the plan that we took to the Australian people. Now, one half of the NEG is the reliability guarantee, and that's becoming a reality, which is really important. But I have to say to you, on climate change, it is real. We take it very seriously. As the Prime Minister made clear, we will meet and beat our 2020 target. There's been a 1 billion tonne turnaround since we've come to government, and we will meet and beat our 2030 target. We accept the science, and we will continue to take action on
But no revisiting the National Energy Guarantee. Because
our policies have been very clearly
let me
set
put
out.
this proposition to you. It just seems to me, because that went through your party room several times, Labor were going to support it. Had you put it to the Parliament, it probably would have been 140 to 10, the 10 being maybe 10 dissidents from your side. You've got a policy that 140 out of 150 in the Parliament support, and it doesn't get up.
Look, we've set out our policy to the Australian people before the election. We will faithfully implement and execute that now after the election. What we are doing is we're reducing emissions, but we're also ensuring that energy prices will come down and that the stability of the system will be reassured. I mean, Bill Shorten got into a lot of trouble during his campaign when he couldn't explain how he would meet his targets, how much it would cost the economy. Our targets are costed, are funded, and we've got the record of meeting and beating our previous targets.
All right, Scott Morrison's place in the Liberal Party now, what would that be?
Well, it's secure as a great leader, as somebody who's led us to an election victory that not many people expected. But he had great faith in what was going to occur. He spoke to the aspirations of the Australian people, and he can take enormous credit for the leadership, for the belief, for the conviction that he has shown.
And what do you do now for the rest of the day?
Well, I'm heading down to a local bowls club because last Friday, Barrie, or on Friday, just a couple of days ago, I was there speaking to the members about the election. And I said, if we won the election and if I won my seat, I'd come back and shout the bar. So I think that's an obligation I better keep.
You're the John Singleton of Australian politics.
Well, with a much smaller wallet, I have to tell you. But that's what I'll be doing today, and I'll be thanking all the volunteers because all my colleagues across the country, have had teams of volunteers, people who have faithfully supported us. But today is not about the Liberal Party. It's actually about the Australian people. It was a point that Scott Morrison underlined in his speech last night. I want to pay tribute to Bill Shorten and the Labor Party for the campaign that they ran, but particularly I want to credit Scott Morrison for last night's result.
Thanks for dropping by.
Always good to be with you.
Earlier this morning, I visited the Governor-General here in Canberra and he accepted my advice for an election to be held on the 18th of May.
Come here. I'll show you how it works.
You vote for me, you'll get me. You vote for Bill Shorten and you'll get Bill Shorten.
We've made a conscious decision to start the 2019 campaign in the family lounge room of an everyday Australian family.
Bill Shorten lies. He lies all the time.
That is a rubbish story, and no doubt the government will help be fueling it.
I need fuel.
Our nation must choose the habits and fears of the past.
And not you or anybody else on this planet is going to make me change my mind.
Or the demands and opportunities of the future.
Have you made a decision about tonight's opportunity?
I've always been very clear in my views and my position on things. It is my vision for this country, as your Prime Minister, to keep the promise of Australia to all Australians.
What?
We live in the best country in the world, but to secure your future, the road ahead depends on a strong economy.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Well, let's listen to these pleas and exactly what they're saying at the start. The Queensland Labor government, Labor government, the Queensland Labor government, Labor.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.
But what I worry about for people like Johnny is that the car he is driving today will not be the car he is driving tomorrow.
Get the hell out of my car, old man! Johnny be good.
Why is everyone so frightened of One Nation?
There is no choice. This mine cannot be built.
Has anyone seen their Environment Minister?
Erase from existence.
We all do. We all want a cleaner environment, but you've got to come up with the numbers.
We're actually fair income.
We have a fair income serious plan for managing our population.
Labor has a fair income policy on childcare.
There's that word again.
Oh, look, I'd heard some pretty crazy policies from the Labor Party, but changing the recipe of Vegemite is a first, I think.
Just give me something without any sugar in it, okay?
Bringing people together is what Bill Shorten does best.
Honest cat. Perfect.
Scott Morrison is a great Prime Minister.
Great Scott. I've got $4 billion. Do you think I'll do anything for money? I've got $4,000 million. Do you think I'm going to worry about anybody else? I couldn't give a snap.
We all have to make decisions that affect the course of our lives.
How good is Australia?
We can't change the past. My word, we can change the future.
Oh, the future. Oh, I can tell you about the future.
Back to the polls. Surely not. Okay, right, on to the result again now, and we'll just start to break it all down. But in the end, Scott Morrison, relentless, on message, overwhelmingly negative, David.
Yeah, absolutely, and it worked a treat. I mean, in that final week, the message about rents going up and property prices falling was absolutely non-stop, and there was no question that could get him off message. There was that attempt by Labor, I think, to create an issue over same-sex marriage. Do people go to hell? Right? Do gay people go to hell? That issue came up, but they got rid of that within a day and got back onto rents and housing prices, and it was just non-stop. It was incredibly disciplined.
And the word since the election has been miracle, undoubtedly. Here's Scott Morrison again.
I have always believed in miracles. I'm standing with the three biggest miracles in my life here tonight. And tonight we've been delivered another one.
Now, Patricia, as Josh Frydenberg just told us, that was his message before the election. So he's consistent on that.
Well, look, we know he's a deeply religious man. He clearly does believe in miracles. I don't think this was a miracle myself. I think this was incredibly good campaigning from the Liberal Party, and you've got to give full credit not just to Scott Morrison but also the campaign director Andrew Hurst, who ran an incredibly disciplined campaign. Let's talk about why it was so disciplined. Scott Morrison just kept hitting the same message. Compare it to Labor's campaign, which, started on health, moved to a referendum on wages, kind of fumbled its way into a bit of climate change. By the end, it was a climate change emergency. It was like a shopping list, whereas Scott Morrison's...
They're all pretty important issues.
They were important. I'm not suggesting they're not important.
Campaign.
But it was just too broad and random right? It wasn't coherent. Whereas I think Scott Morrison's message...
It wasn't negative either when you go through it.
And the mother of all scare campaigns. I'm sorry, we talked about Mediscare in the last campaign. This one was better. This was one of the best negative campaigns I've seen, and I'm sure people will watch that and think, is she rewarding negativity? No, I'm not. I'm just analysing, and it worked. Now, I think when Scott Morrison kept repeating this whole Bill Shorten wants to put his hand in your pocket, it was very visual, and of course it also pressed the button of the questions people had around Bill Shorten being slippery, untrustworthy. So he married two themes there. The one around concerns around the economy, that Bill Shorten would tax you, whether, you know, the retiree tax is a fabrication in terms of the language and the way it's been described is kind of by the by, because ultimately the big scare on taxes was so enormous and on housing that it created the illusion that Labor would go after more tax reform that would hurt ordinary people.
It was completely...
Well, I think the problem was that Bill was not able to explain to people properly and fully, and nor was his campaign, about what the benefits would be for people in the end from these measures. He seemed to be on the defensive too often. I don't think it ever got through to people, you know, what they were actually going to get out of all these massive taxes. I think they failed there both on the air campaign and the on the ground campaign, and I think that's where they were done over by the Liberals as well. You know, Andrew Hurst and the other state directors, Chris Stone. I mean, they zeroed in on those things, and they made sure that the messages got through to people about what they were going to lose. Not what they were going to gain,
well, they extended it
what
beyond
they
that.
stood
It's
to
not
lose.
that they even though the people who were losers in this were people who have a lot of shares and benefit from franking credits, or those who negatively gear housing, but they managed to persuade, I think, a lot of people who were not going to be impacted that they would be.
And they had... Labor had given them time to build up that attack line. It's interesting that Tanya Plibersek said in the interview that they didn't have enough time to make their case. Well, you look at their negative gearing changes, that's been on the table for 3 years. I think it was the division on the coalition side that actually lulled Labor into a false sense of complacency about the size of the reform agenda it was taking to the election. Negative gearing, then superannuation changes. Then, of course, only a year ago, the dividend imputation changes. They did all those in a climate where the government was on the defensive and looked like an easy target. Once Morrison changed that around, the sheer scale, I don't think it was any one of those tax items. It was the sheer scale of the combined agenda that began to work against it.
And the fear that it would be more. The fear that it wasn't... The mistake in the analysis, I think, was that people would just go, am I in this category? Oh, I'm not, it's fine.
Well, no, if you hear retiree tax, you think, and you're a retiree, yeah, of course I'm in that category.
Well, a year ago...
when they're not.
A year ago...
The otother problem that I saw anyway, that big rally in Blacktown Town Hall where he was comparing himself to Whitlam, and he had one line out of that, I think, which would have sent a chill through people, and it was, if you want to change everything, vote for Labor. Well, I think a lot of people would have thought, oh my goodness, what else is he going to do?
You know, that comes back to the old saying, change, but not too much change. And do it gradually. That question was put to Penny Wong last night. Will any party ever go in an election again presenting themselves as a big target? That's she is.
There's no doubt that, you know, we did run with a set of policies that were, I think, that are the right thing for the country. The government ran with a scare campaign, and there's no doubt that, you know, the scare campaign has bitten in some areas. The Labor Party is a party that has always looked to the future. I think that is, and we have done well where we have offered a vision for that future, and I'm proud of the campaign we have run and the policies we've put forward. My view is we face a pretty turbulent, challenging world. Globally, we face a pretty, you know, set of challenges, policy and economic, social and economic policy here. I want the Labor Party to continue to be prepared to actually put forward an agenda that addresses them.
David, we don't want to, as a country, for political parties to be overly cautious, to be too afraid to put out big ideas.
One of the great things about this election was the sheer size of the agenda that was up for debate. I thought that was a great thing about this election. But I think one of the lessons of this election is that it is just too dangerous for an opposition to put forward such a big reform agenda. They made themselves a big target. This has been, an observation many are making. Big target, and it's really cost them. And I think it raises all these questions about what Labor does next. The soul searching will go on for some time. It goes through to leadership questions about whether they choose a leader from the left or the right. I think that's
we'll
part
come
of
back to Labor because we'll look at what it means in terms of soul searching there. But I think there are some questions too that the coalition should be asking itself, despite this unexpected victory. But let's start with Peter Dutton, who despite everything that was thrown at him, including from Get Up, he survived in Dixon.
I want to quote a former Prime Minister. His name was Paul Keating, and the quote was, "This is the sweetest victory of all." So, there is an amazing mood across Queensland and across the country in support of the Prime Minister, and I want to pay tribute to Scott Morrison tonight for his leadership.
So, Niki, given Peter Dutton survives, they had an extraordinary result in Queensland. How now internally is that going to impact on the Liberal Party? Does that have the right saying, well, we told you all along this is the way to go?
Well, Morrison will have absolute authority inside the Liberal Party. He will set directions, he will make decisions. What we don't know is what exactly he's going to do because he never spelled it out. All we got during the campaign was a commitment to legislate tax cuts and also to put the budget into surplus. But he didn't need a mandate because he hasn't got one. Is that what you're saying? He hasn't got a mandate to do anything beyond that. So whatever it is he wants to do for the next 3 years, he will have to tread very cautiously. Also, both inside the party and with the public. He's not going to be able to spring any surprises. He has to take both party and public with him. Now, he's as much an enigma, I think, with Liberal Party MPs as he is with the public. He's not really a known quantity. So we don't know where we're going or what we're going to do when we get there.
Look, and some of us, I've seen some critique of the way the media behaved here. Look, there wasn't an interview with a coalition frontbencher where I didn't push on what was this agenda. After you're finished with your tax cuts, what are you going to do with 2.5 years? Right. I think it's a reasonable question and we need to keep asking it. One
of the hardest questions for them to answer during this campaign, and I asked it of the Prime Minister in the interview, what is your third term agenda? So Niki's absolutely right on the difficulty of what they do. However, there is one thing that Scott Morrison said last night, our government will come together. I mean, it's an acknowledgement of the division, but I think it's pretty clear the outcome gives him authority.
But the division was there on display in the last days with the New South Wales Senate ticket and Jim Molan's people, some supporting encouraging people to vote below the line. That set off Barnaby Joyce.
Barnaby Joyce's leadership ambitions have gone nowhere. Barnaby Joyce will, I believe, try to run for the Nationals leadership.
But Michael McCormack saved Cowper, saved Farrer. Barnaby Joyce is finished as a potential leader of the National Party. Maybe in his own mind, a hope still exists, but Michael McCormack, I think, will be re-endorsed probably unanimously because they succeeded very well in this campaign in holding on to their seats and in increasing their vote. And it was not because Barnaby helped them do it, it was in spite of what Barnaby was doing. All right, well, let's hear what tone that Barnaby Joyce adopted last night.
You went after one bloke. You went after him. And whilst you're going after him, you forgot about the other seats you might have won, you clowns. And that's why you don't win elections. You did it you've done it in Cowper as well. You went and backed in Mr Oakeshott, spent God knows how much, and you could have reused that money in other seats. You could have been the government tonight, you fools.
Oh, the big shout-out goes to Get Up
And all the money you wasted, congratulations. I hope you can go back to your donors and tell them how you blew their money. You could have spent it elsewhere, but anyway, sucked in with a sucker punch, fellas.
There you go. That was very generous.
Lucid.
And he said they went after one person. Well, Tony Abbott was also, they went after Tony Abbott. When I say they, it wasn't a scalp that the Labor Party can claim. It was, the independents claimed that scalp, and Zali Steggall in particular. Let's hear now from Tony Abbott.
I always knew it was going to be tough here in Warringah. And I can't say that it doesn't hurt to lose. But I decided back then in October of last year that if I had to lose, so be it. I'd rather be a loser than a quitter.
What now for him?
Well, I imagine that he will be on the sidelines, again, giving everyone the benefit of his advice. But I don't think, apart from his small group of Delcons, that people will be paying too much attention to him. The problem with Tony Abbott, he did give a very gracious speech last night. I thought it was one of his better performances, but he wasn't defeated by Get Up, he wasn't defeated by trade unions, he was defeated by a grassroots revolution inside the Liberal Party in his own electorate. They no longer wanted him as their local member because he didn't stand up for them and he didn't stand for anything that they believed in. So I think if the Liberal Party wants to go forward with an agenda on things like climate change, or on reform of social issues, I don't think Tony Abbott is going to be much help on that front.
We're going to talk about miracles. Let's talk about this miracle. Scott Morrison is now the Prime Minister in a party room where Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott are no longer there. It is a miracle for him. He basically doesn't have any of the ghosts of the past there, Barrie. He can move on into the future. In Josh Frydenberg, as we just saw there, he has a treasurer who has got so much energy that it's really, I mean, we know this about Josh Frydenberg, it's incredible. That is an incredible story. And I'm sure, Crowe, you're getting it too, but the Liberals, I mean, they don't want to lose Warringah, let's be clear. No one wants to lose Warringah as a blue seat.
But it's a gift.
But it was the best thing that ever happened.
Relieved. This is the best outcome for them.
So, David, there'll be some in the Liberal Party who would be saying, wow, look what just happened. We won government and Tony Abbott is gone.
I mean, in a sense, the lesson from Tony Abbott's difficulty in Warringah is they needed a different candidate in Warringah before the election rather than after. It looks like they'll get over the line. I think there's a chance that they'll form majority government anyway, but maybe a more moderate Liberal would have worked more successfully in Warringah.
He should have given that speech 3 years ago.
And the proof, in a sense, was during the campaign in the way in which he had to acknowledge that the Paris targets had to stay after all, something he had campaigned against so much during the last term of Parliament.
Well, whatever happens, even if they're in majority, it'll be very tight, so they need to keep an eye on the crossbenchers, keep them happy. That brings us to climate change. 2 new independents, Helen Haynes in Indi, a remarkable effort for her to carry on the independence tradition in Indi, and the other one is Zali Steggall. Let's hear them on climate change.
It was very clear to me that climate was a number one issue that the people of Indi wanted action on. So that's what I'm committed. I committed to the people of Indi to do my very best on that.
I will be a climate leader for you. And I will keep the new government to account and make sure we take action on climate change. I will push for real action so our children and generations to come, they can enjoy the environment and our beautiful beaches and our beautiful country the way we enjoy it.
OK, that's one message, and there was another message from an important player in all of this, though she's leaving, has now left politics, and that's Julie Bishop, who was Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party for 11 years. This is what she had to say.
The Liberal Party will have to reassess its position on climate change. It will have to end the uncertainty, and that's where I've said in the past that the National Energy Guarantee was the closest we had to a bipartisan position on climate change. They're going to have to revisit it because you cannot lose a seat like Warringah where 52% name climate change as the number one issue and then don't reassess your policy.
Very clear. OK, that's what they say. Josh Frydenberg is the deputy leader and probably more powerful than ever, and he said, no, we've got our policy, we'll stick with it.
And he's just been through that as Energy Minister over the last couple of years. There's no way that he or Scott Morrison want to open that Pandora's box. Scott Morrison declared last September that the NEG is dead. Now, I know that they have the reliability component of the National Energy Guarantee, but the emissions component, I think, is dead. I think it's too difficult for them to bring it back. And Zali Steggall and Helen Haines, as voices in the new parliament, will not be powerful enough to change that.
But even for their own sake, they have to find a way to talk to people about climate change and the environment. I don't think, I mean, I thought what Josh said today was basically a holding pattern, right, until they...
Is that what you took it as, a holding pattern? Because if anybody got the message, it would have been him. Look, he held his seat, but it was coming through loud and clear in the contest that climate change mattered.
It mattered.
Or is that just a Victorian thing?
It is a Victorian thing, but Josh Frydenberg is from Victoria, and I know he's got that message from Victoria. He thinks it's an important issue, and he knows that there is a message from the electorate. But remember, there's a competing message, and that's Queensland and that's Adani. And that is ultimately going to be the division in the party room, isn't it? Because they think they've got a message that Adani was a vote switcher, and that was the opposite climate message. So what does it say about a nation divided, Niki?
Well, we're talking about two countries, aren't we?
Yep.
But that's what I'm saying. They have to find a way to be able to talk to people in Victoria about climate change and the environment. I mean, it's not just climate change, it's environmental matters as well that also speaks to people in Queensland. And in order to do that, he has to have a very good cabinet minister in that portfolio. And I wonder who that's going to be.
Well, he's already said it'll be Melissa Price.
Well, that would be a big mistake.
You've talked about the divide, Queensland, pro-Adani, Victoria, pro-climate change, or doing something about climate change. New South Wales, where does it sit? What drives the voters in New South Wales, David, when nothing happened in New South Wales? Labor won Gilmore, right? But boy, did they make a mess of that seat. But nothing else.
Well, there was a shift in some Imsun's seats. It didn't change who held that seat. But I'm intrigued by the fact that there was a 4.7% swing to Labor in North Sydney, in Trent Zimmerman's seat. Somebody who had tried to defend Malcolm Turnbull, tried to defend the National Energy Guarantee. Whereas you look out further west and you've got the Liberals possibly winning Macquarie, winning Lindsay. So there is an inside-outside divide here, and I think climate change is part of that. Climate change worked in some of those inner seats, did not work for them in the same way, did not work for Labor in the same way in Queensland. You've got a difference in the swings, a 1.3% swing to Labor in Griffith, in Brisbane. But you look out a bit west of Brisbane and in Groom, there's a 5.3% swing to the LNP. So different swings. You're not seeing it just in terms of who holds the seat, but that is, again, the nation divided.
But the other thing I think in New South Wales that was working against Labor was the overhang from Michael Daly and what Michael Daly said about Chinese coming in and taking jobs. That was playing very strongly in some certain seats because the Chinese community was very offended by that remark, and they're not going to forgive and they're not going to forget for a very long time. So I think they continued to pay a price for that.
OK, let's go back now to the Labor Party and, of course, Bill Shorten's role in this and how much blame should be sheeted home to him. Keep in mind, he'd been there for 6 years. That's a staunch effort. He united a fractured party. He led from the front on policy, but in the end, none of that mattered.
It was a shared responsibility because it was a shared policy platform. And I don't think it would be fair in the circumstances to sheet it all to the leader. Now, obviously, there's a debate about the fact that Bill Shorten could never get the edge against Malcolm Turnbull or Scott Morrison as preferred Prime Minister. That's a fact. Then there's the question about the polls. I guess, giving Labor the sense that they had the edge over the government when they should not have been so sure of themselves. But it ultimately came down to the policy platform, which was a shared responsibility, and so therefore it's a shared endeavour to rethink their policy platform, rethink their leadership, obviously, in time for the next election, and I think it's going to take some time. Hard to walk back from things like negative gearing that they invested so much into.
It was, had Labor won the election, we'd be talking about the Daily Telegraph story and how that backfired on them, and that Bill Shorten got a benefit out of that because it humanised him and gave him something in the middle of the campaign. That happened anyway, didn't it? It's just that everything else was bigger. It was
overwhelmed by all those other factors. I still believe that actually was a net positive for him. It humanised him, and it was actually, I still think, one of the key moments of the campaign, but it turns out that it wasn't enough.
OK, now let's look at the possible field for the leadership. Start with Chris Bowen as Treasurer. Now, given everything that you guys have been saying about that leading up to this, is this one leadership ballot that he should avoid?
Look, I'm not going to advise him to avoid it, but I do think he was the shadow treasurer that was essentially responsible for a lot of these very high-risk policies, this big target. And let's not forget that line, which I've got to say that the Liberal Party has been trading on, which is if you don't like it, don't vote Labor, right? When he said that, Josh Frydenberg basically quotes that in every single interview he does. I might be exaggerating a little. It was a huge mistake, so I do think he has to now carry that blunder. I mean, it was really quite arrogant to say just don't vote Labor. It showed sort of a complacency or an arrogance. I think so. That's one issue with him. I think Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek are both from the left, so that's an interesting one. My understanding.
So who then would the left choose from those two, and who do you think the party membership would choose from those two?
I think the party membership will be quite split on that. I think they're both appealing to the base of the Labor Party, but in the caucus, my understanding is that Anthony Albanese has the left more than Tanya Plibersek does, but that's at this stage.
Tanya Plibersek would have a lot of the old Bill Shorten vote, I would have thought, because she was so loyal to the bloke.
That's absolutely right, and that of course discounts a right-wing candidate. Don't discount someone like Jim Chalmers. Now, I know he's younger, but he's played a pretty pivotal role in this campaign. He's a sharp communicator. He's a Queenslander.
Yep.
I think that matters. I think Queensland, they have to do so much rebuilding. He's a centrist, he's a sharp communicator. I know he's young and I know he's been encouraged to run. Now, he's thinking about it. I don't know if he'll ultimately put his hand up, but they also need a new generation of leaders.
That's what I think too. I would encourage Jim Chalmers to run because I think they need a new generation of leaders, right? All the people that we've mentioned so far, they really have been part of the problem, not part of the solution. I think it's very sad, but maybe time has passed them by. So it could be time for them to go to the next generation and try and set a new direction and to start talking to people about aspiration again, not to run the class warfare stuff, and to talk about jobs. I mean, you hardly ever heard Shorten talking about jobs and what his plan was to grow the economy and grow jobs.
He did talk about giving them more money, wages, and wages.
And I think that was an effective message when he said, as they said throughout the campaign, the economy is not working for working people. They knew that was effective as a message. I think on the economy, sorry, Niki, I mean, this gets back to a leader, the next leader possibly coming from the right of the party. In a funny kind of way, Bill Shorten from the right often moved to the left when he was attacking the government. They've now got to rethink whether they got their position on the political spectrum correct through the last term of Parliament, and that may be an argument for the next leader coming from the right of the party rather than the left.
And when you go to Queensland, you just have it firmly in your head, I'm talking here to blue-collar workers. That's who I'm talking to.
How do I talk? They talk often, Victorians...
What do they want to hear?
Often Victorians talk to me about learning how to talk Victorian and that Scott Morrison needed to learn how to talk Victorian, but I do think Labor needs to learn how to talk Queensland. But look, I've got to say, I think Tanya Plibersek or Anthony Albanese would be quite formidable leaders. They are very skilled communicators. Both of them would be formidable leaders, but I do think Labor now has to have a broader conversation about that next layer, that next generation, and how they go forward. I think gender is an issue. Can I raise it? Can I go there? Am I allowed to? I think they have it, please. I think the coalition, yes, they may have won, but they have a massive gender problem. And this is a massive issue. This doesn't go away just because they've won a victory. This is a massive issue. Well, so I do think someone like Tanya Plibersek could obviously counter that pretty strongly.
Yeah. Arthur Sinodinos... go on.
No.
Arthur Sinodinos acknowledged last night that that's still a problem within the coalition and something still needs to be done. So I think one of the lessons out of this campaign is they can't just pat themselves on the back and think everything is hunky-dory. They've still got divisions within the party room. They've got to paper over those. And they still have the gender issue, which they've got to confront for the next election.
That's right. It's not as if, you know, suddenly all the problems have been solved inside the Liberal Party. In fact, you know, this is when the real problems start to come to the fore on climate change, on energy, dare I mention it, even religious freedom, because the Prime Minister has said he wants to address that. I suspect that there will be a fair bit of tension surrounding that. So
just before we move on to the next topic, but let's hear just one more time from Bill Shorten from last night.
Friends, I am disappointed by tonight's results. But I am not disappointed for me. I'll always be proud of the courage and the integrity and the vision that our team showed. I'm disappointed for people who depend upon Labor, but I'm proud that we argued what was right, not what was easy. This is what politics should be in our country. Politics should be the battle of ideas. And I say to all of you here, and all of those tens of thousands of people, the volunteers, the candidates, that you leave here tonight with your head held up. I say carry on the fight.
OK, and just before we move on, we talked about Chris Bowen putting his hat in the ring. He hasn't formally said so, but this is as far as he was prepared to go last night.
Well, I said before, the two hardest jobs in Australian politics are Leader of the Opposition and Immigration Minister. I've done one. Yep, we'll have a think. In all seriousness, all of us need to now reflect on our roles in rebuilding the Labor Party. Now, for some of us, that will be running for leader. For some of us, it won't be. We all have to, you know, just take a bit of time to think it through. I'm certainly not making any rash decisions tonight.
All right, Clive Palmer now. What did he get for $80 million? Nothing. He didn't get anything in the House of Representatives. He got about 3% of the vote and probably won't get a Senate seat. What he did do, though, I think, was to damage Labor, because you look at his ads, and the one you know, these double-page ads. One side would be in praise of Clive Palmer and his policies. The other was just slamming Bill Shorten, right?
Absolutely, and that's what Tanya Plibersek said. She raised that in the interview with you, Barrie. I think, and I was speaking to a lot of senior Labor people, and you know, before election day and the week before, and all of them were saying we're really worried about the effect that Clive Palmer is going to have, not just in terms of preferences, but just the messaging that he has actually really back-ended this campaign by the coalition about the scare campaign about their agenda and their policy suite. And I think that's right. I think that's how it's turned out. So we talk about what's in it for Clive Palmer, what's he got out of it. Well, he doesn't have a Labor government. Sure, he hasn't got a personal benefit, but as a businessman, he doesn't have a Labor government.
And we'll all be watching to see whether he gets $60 million back in some way over the next 3 years. But I think those ads were effective, especially when the print ads kept coming after the media blackout on Wednesday night, and they just kept hammering it. To be honest, I was wondering whether $60 million would buy you one Senate seat or two. Turns out it doesn't buy you any, which is actually a good outcome for democracy in that sense. You can't just buy a seat in Parliament, but he still had an effect.
I sort of think of him, though, in the same way as I think about Get Up, and that'll get everybody going. They spend a lot of money to influence outcomes. They never get any of their own candidates up, but they have a huge impact on who gets up and who doesn't.
What can they claim this time? They didn't get Peter Dutton. They got Tony Abbott.
Yeah, they got Tony Abbott. Yeah. They raised $12.5 million over the last 12 months. So the money came in. They had a lot of volunteers on the ground, as did the union movement. The union movement had people door-knocking in the seat of Ford to try and get Bert Van Manen. He got a swing towards him. So there's a reality check for some of that grass campaign.
Hand, I think, in a few places.
I think we do have to talk about the union movement very briefly, but the Change the Rules campaign, look, they were briefing, and I'm sure you guys have heard it too, that it was, you know, similar to the Work Choices 2007 campaign. They ran a ground campaign. They'd invested a lot of money in it, a lot of resources. And look at the result.
It didn't have the potency of that Work Choices campaign from 2007, did it? It was about a wage increase, but when you look down to it, I mean, Bill Shorten had a hard commitment on an increase in penalty rates for a lot of people. That was actually something that was deliverable. On the rest of it, it was more about tweaking the rules so that the Fair Work Commission might increase wages, and I think that was not as tangible as Labor would have liked.
And the way they managed the childcare wage, I thought, was a real blunder for Labor during the campaign. So they gave the childcare workers, they announced the increase to their wages, and then Bill Shorten, for a couple of days, really flip-flopped on the answer about who was next, then tried to shut it down. It was all over the shop, really, and of course it raised questions. Is the taxpayer going to be bankrolling wage rises for groups of workers? It was actually ended up being damaging, even though it was meant to be this positive message.
Because they couldn't sell any single element of their policy properly. You know, it seemed to be, well, we'll have a go at this one and then we'll have a go at that one. There weren't any consistencies in their messaging or any attempt to put it all together. And I think
they should have been saying constantly, stop calling it a retiree tax, but they didn't really.
Well, and stop calling it a gift. I think it was wrong to call it a gift.
He doubled down on that. You know.
That put a lot of people off.
Speaking of gifts and money, should we have sympathy for the bloke who put $1 million on the Labor Party with Ladbrokes? Because Ladbrokes didn't pay out. Sportsbet did. So that guy lost $1 million. Sportsbet lost $1.3 million because they paid out early on Labor as a very expensive publicity stunt, as it turned out. But look, they've got a sense of humour. They tweeted this last night. Yep, we blew $1.3 million. Could have been $80 million though, eh, Clive? Which I thought
so good.
Pretty clever. All right, let's move on now to the Senate. And for this rundown, I'm indebted to Ben Oquist from the Australia Institute, who I think knows the Senate just about as well as anybody. This is what he tells me is the likely outcome. LNP 34, Labor 27, the Greens 9, One Nation 2, Centre Alliance 2, Jackie Lambie got up 1 and Cory Bernardi 1. Now, what Ben tells me is that you could have a situation where the LNP will get one more and Labor loses one in Queensland. On summary now, Clive Palmer missed out. That's a fact. But Malcolm Roberts gets in ahead of him for One Nation. In Victoria, the LNP, not Labor, got the 3 Senate spots. You know, the trend was supposed to be the other way. The Greens held all their seats and they doubled their vote in South Australia. But now, this is the key point, and maybe we'll put that graphic up again so we can explain this one, where Labor and the Greens oppose the government on legislation. The government will need 5 of the 6 crossbenchers that are left to get a majority of 39. 5 of those 6 crossbenchers, that is not unreasonable given the nature of them.
It's very difficult. They can obviously claim the support of Cory Bernardi, but trying to get an outcome where you can get Centre Alliance and One Nation behind the same package is going to be a real challenge. Now, Matthias Cormann showed in the last Parliament that a lot of the time he's up for that challenge. Certainly it didn't pan out on company tax cuts, but he got there on other things. This gets back to the issue of what is their third-term agenda. Possibly
what do they need to get
Possibly it's very wise to have taken a small target approach here, because there's nothing other than the income tax cuts, which I think could get the support of Centre Alliance and Pauline Hanson and Cory Bernardi and probably Jackie Lambie. Once that's done, perhaps at the end of June, what do they then move on to? They can afford to move very carefully, I think.
All of our focus leading up to this on the Senate was, will they allow Labor's franking credits to get through? Will they vote for the negative gearing? You know, and we didn't give a whole lot of thought to how a Senate would deal with a re-elected coalition government. But if you're right, David, there's not much to deal with anyway, and they can just ignore the Senate.
No, I think David's right. They could probably get their tax cuts through. And given in their defence.
Given the track record.
Yeah, and they outlined their tax cuts from the budget, and they did campaign on it. It was the only thing they campaigned on, so no one can say they hid that. They were quite upfront about it. And in fact, they took quite a... You know, they had obviously a very strong campaign against the way that higher income earners would benefit from those tax cuts, and they articulated that. They wouldn't quite answer or establish the amount, as we know, but either way, they did outline that. So I do think it'll probably get through the Senate. But then, yeah, religious freedoms that you've raised, we know that the Prime Minister wants to take action on that. How does that work with that Senate? I haven't got the answer, but it's going to be interesting.
Now, very late on Friday and then into Saturday, the story broke about the billboards going up in some seats in Victoria that purported to be AEC billboards. They were in Chinese, but in fact, rather than simply navigate you through the voting process, they basically urged you to vote Liberal or how to vote Liberal. Now, I think something like that came up in Bennelong last time around, and Labor were accused at that time of the dirty tricks. David, this sort of thing is...
I think there's going to be a big debate about some of the campaign tactics used. Social media is part of that, but let's just look at the poster that was used in Chisholm, using the colours of the AEC, the purple colour of the AEC. That said everything about this campaign, because Scott Morrison very cleverly suppressed the Liberal brand. I mean, how far do you go to do that? You end up adopting the colour scheme of the AEC itself. There'll be a lot of questions about that particular tactic, but across the board, burying the Liberal brand or hiding the Liberal brand, hiding some of those Liberal ministers, actually worked for them. Now, on social media, there's going to be a big debate about how they appeal to different parts of the community, including the Chinese community on WeChat.
Yes, WeChat.
I spoke to Labor MPs who said they were being asked about a death tax, inheritance tax. So have a look at social media. Some of those ideas did get spread. And so I think there'll be, possibly as part of the post-election inquiry, those kind of issues could come up in terms of authorising some of the content that appears on social media.
I know yesterday Bill Shorten was concerned, actually, before polls had closed, about the WeChat element. Just wondering how that was working, and I spoke to Labor MPs who told me death tax keeps getting raised with us.
Well, the way that advertisement was cut up was outrageous. You know, it just had them saying death tax, when the sentence might have been, we have no intention of imposing a death tax.
And this idea
the door to all this kind of stuff was opened in 2016 when Labor ran Mediscare. They sent text messages which looked as if they were coming from Medibank to warn people about the government selling off and privatising Medibank. Now, that was a very dishonest campaign, but after that, the Liberals thought, we're not going to get caught by that again, and in fact, we'll copy what they did and then we'll give you some more as well. So this is where we are now, right, with our campaigning styles and with all the sort of dishonesty, really, that both sides are putting to people about what they're doing or not doing. I don't know. People who don't really pay attention, how do they separate truth from fiction?
It was wrong then, and it's wrong now.
And it's wrong now.
It's wrong.
And the parallel was the fake rent notice that went out to argue the government's case on rent increases under the negative gearing changes. Well, Labor issued little Medicare cards in 2016 to talk about privatising Medicare. That was their claim, that Medicare would be privatised.
Real estate agents got involved this time, as they're entitled to do. But again, it was... as a general comment, though, Patricia, what would you say about the campaign? Do you think it was just politics as usual, or was it worse this time around?
I thought it was a really ugly campaign, Barry. I'm not going to sort of lie about that. I thought it was incredibly negative. I thought we saw a flip, though. So last campaign, Malcolm Turnbull wanted to be positive. He didn't go negative enough, and hurt him. He only won a one-seat majority. This time we saw Labor try to go a bit more positive and not run so negative. Perhaps they were scarred by the commentary around the Mediscare campaign. The Coalition went extremely negative. I think the lesson is that negative works. I apologise to our viewers that I have this to declare, but I think it works. Whether it should work, well, morally, I have a different view.
Well, I would rather that it did not work.
Yeah, me too.
I think reporting on big ideas in national politics, you don't want negative to work, but I think the evidence is in from this campaign that it did work. Something that'll shape the next campaign.
Yep. All right, well, our panel, Niki Savva, David Crowe and Patricia Karvelas, will be back shortly with final observations, but it's time now for Mike Bowes and Sammy J and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowes, I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I've come down to the Blue Ties change room to soak in the smell of liniment and old money and talk to the government coach about the grand final that's just been played.
Mate, this is the sweetest victory of all.
You seem to play ScoMo solo.
Yeah, well, he gave it 110%. That's 100% plus GST, and we brought home the bacon.
Where was Cash?
Well, obviously she was behind the whiteboard.
Right. What about Onion?
I know it's easy to knock Tony, but it's also fun to knock Tony, so, you know, it's a win-win.
Well, let's go and have a bit of a look at the game plan, shall we?
Can I get you a Burley Griff beer?
Now, look, Coach, I wanted your professional opinion on this. How's his kicking technique?
Wrong clothes, wrong footwear, wrong time of day, wrong code.
Wrong code.
But he's having a go.
Having a go.
You know,
Get a go.
It was a pleasure to coach him.
Was the former captain, John Howard, much help to you during the...
We actually got the Howard hotline just here, who's able to call me for advice. In fact, 1 second. John. Yeah, what a result. Thanks so much, mate. Okay, say hi to Jeanette for me. Cheers.
It's a payphone.
Yeah, but the taxpayer pays for it.
Here we have Bill Shorten in the final week laying a few bricks.
No, he's not laying them, he's actually dismantling our strong border protection policy.
Lovely Pat Campbell, who's thinking of turning the candidates into disendorsed party candidates into
Little party pies. Very much a Sweeney Todd-esque little number here.
Were you surprised by how many injuries there were?
It was rough. I actually had to introduce a new social media policy at the club, which is basically crush your phones and communicate via fax machine.
Lovely Cadeltra, Coalition Queensbury rules in the Senate, no punching or voting below the line.
Yeah.
Some of the papers were rather large.
Yeah, we actually used the Senate voting forms as our banner to run through on the day.
Did you vote below the line, Coach?
Mate,
Did you play below the line?
Vote or play? I don't vote. I'm above the game.
Right.
It's sort of Governor General and myself.
Does the Queen ever sort of chime in with a bit of how is she on the game?
She regards us in the same way that we would regard your common, filthy local suburban league, with disinterest yet affection.
There seemed to be a bit of tension in the coalition as the National accused the Liberals of poor sportsmanship in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, below the line, there's no honour amongst sandbag thieves, Scott. You've got to remember, it's two separate clubs, two separate cultures. We have a tradition of respecting the rules.
Yeah.
And the Nationals have a tradition of, evil treachery on the eve of a premiership. So,
Very sad news as the former captain coach of the Labor team passed away, Bob Hawke.
Fans loved him, and with good reason.
Yeah.
He was a champion of the game.
Champion of the game. Now, the Australian Cartoonists Association just incidentally did a poll of its members this week, and coming out first as the favourite Prime Minister to draw was Bob Hawke with 28.5% of the vote. Tony Abbott was second.
I'm not really into drawing the little sort of cartoons. I'm actually playing the real game.
Sean Leahy did Are You Sure, Bob? Every vote counts as he's up in the pearly gates.
Well, we know fans were pre-voting in record numbers, so, I imagine he was one of them.
Well, Coach, I know that there was a lot of naysayers, me being one of them, but the most unlikely of victories, and well done.
We have long memories of this club, and you are officially dead to us.
Well, in that case, I'll let you do the best and fairest.
Back to you in the studio, Barry. Good play.
They showed great foresight, those guys. They saw it coming. OK, they mentioned Bob Hawke. Let's talk about Bob Hawke, the death of a legendary Labor figure. We had to give priority to the election result, and there has been an extraordinary outpouring of love and respect for him over the past 36 hours. But time for observations, I think, before we wrap up. For me, he was an inspiration. He influenced me for a lifetime, particularly with his absolute abhorrence of racism and bigotry. For me, it was an exceptional personal experience and at times an absolute hoot, I've got to say, to work with him. Patricia.
Look, I was a very tiny child when Bob Hawke was Prime Minister, but if I can just give some personal moment to this, 1983 was the first election I ever remember, and I remember my father, who was a blue-collar worker, a builder, a Greek immigrant, vote for Bob Hawke and tell me he was good for the Greeks. But I do think that's worth mentioning because that's the way that he led in relation to race, which you've mentioned. I remember him as a leader on unity and multiculturalism, and that's my greatest memory of him as a Greek Australian, as as part of the multicultural community in Victoria. So that's my memory. And the anti-apartheid charge that he led, a world leader. He put us on the world stage on that issue, and it's something that our country should forever be proud about. It was absolutely devastating to see him pass away so close to an election, Barrie. And as my 9-year-old said, Bob Hawke wouldn't want to see Labor lose, and that's probably, the timing is the only positive out of this, that he wouldn't have seen this loss.
David?
I remember 1989, and I can still visualise Bob Hawke speaking about Tiananmen Square and weeping. I mean, weeping so much I think his nose was running, you know, just absolutely bawling over the fate of those people.
You know, his staff told him, don't try and read that letter. That was a letter from the embassy in Beijing. He said, don't do it, it'll be too hard. He did it, and that's what happened. Yeah.
And it's a reminder of what leadership is and being able to make the big calls. It's interesting, I noted your memory of that time and how he was told, no, you can't do that. You can't say to 20,000 Chinese, you can stay in Australia. You can't do that, Prime Minister.
Yeah.
It was an exercise in authority and compassion. Wonderful moment.
Niki?
Well, with Bob, what you saw was what you got, good or bad. He had the most brilliant mind. He was an excellent chairman of the board, and he was an extremely naughty boy. And everybody knew that about him, and they loved him for it. And the other good thing about Hawke was that he never held grudges. He was, as he said, a lover rather than a hater. And I always remember on some of the overseas trips we did with him, we would have some very tense moments. I think it's fair to say, Barrie, you were there for...
And some outrageous moments.
They were all part of the mosaic. But when we got on the plane to come back home, it was a sing-along down the back for everybody.
Just like
that. Or a drink-a-thon down the back for everybody.
Yep.
For Bob, it was a smoke-a-thon, you can see with the cigar.
You could in those days. You could smoke a cigar on a plane.
Stunk out the whole plane. But he was a very interesting, a very complex character, an imperfect human being, but a very, very good Prime Minister.
Okay, just finally, my thanks to the producers Robin Powell and Kate Sullivan, who have just wrapped up 24 consecutive hours in this building. They can go home now. Thank you for watching.